The rain poured heavily over New York City, drenching the streets in a blanket of cold darkness. Inside the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, soft golden lights illuminated the lavish wedding reception. It was a night of luxury, filled with expensive champagne, an orchestra playing slow jazz, and elegantly dressed guests clinking glasses in celebration. At the center of it all stood Olivia Carter, now Mrs. Olivia Harrington, a stunning 28-year-old woman with piercing green eyes and a delicate smile that masked a storm within. She had just married William Harrington, a 65-year-old real estate tycoon worth over $300 million. Dressed in an elegant white gown, Olivia played the role of the devoted new wife, kissing William's wrinkled cheek and holding his frail hand. To the guests, it was a fairy tale, an older, wealthy man finding happiness with a younger, beautiful wife. But to Olivia, it was the beginning of something far darker. She had spent the last 2 years planning this. Every move was calculated, every smile rehearsed. Tonight, her plan would be set in motion. Among the guests was Detective James Calloway, a sharp-witted investigator in his early 40s, invited as a +1 by his lawyer friend. He observed the couple with interest. Something about Olivia's eyes, hidden behind the mask of joy, felt off. But tonight was a wedding, not a crime scene. So he shrugged it off, sipped his whiskey, and turned his attention elsewhere. As the night progressed, Olivia excused herself from the party. She walked through the grand corridors of the hotel, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Inside her private suite, she locked the door and retrieved her phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed a message. "It's done. He's mine. But tomorrow, I do what I came here to do." She sent it, then deleted the conversation. When Olivia returned to the ballroom, William was waiting for her. "My love," he said, kissing her softly. "Ready to go upstairs?" She nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, darling." The guests cheered as the newlyweds left the reception, disappearing into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing their fate. Inside the penthouse suite, William poured himself a drink and loosened his tie. Olivia excused herself to the bathroom, where she opened the medicine cabinet and stared at the small glass bottle in her hand. Her heart pounded. Tomorrow he dies. But not just yet. Tonight she had one more role to play, the loving wife. What no one knew was that Olivia wasn't marrying for love or money. She was marrying for revenge. The first light of dawn crept through the massive windows of the penthouse suite, casting a golden hue over the luxurious bedroom. The air smelled of expensive cologne, fine wine, and a lingering trace of perfume. On the king-size bed, William Harrington lay asleep, his breathing slow and steady. Beside him, Olivia sat upright, staring at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had done it. She had married the man she hated the most. Slipping out of bed carefully, Olivia walked toward the large mirror above the dresser. She studied herself, her long, wavy brown hair, the faint smudge of lipstick, the silk nightgown draped over her slender frame. She looked like a woman who had it all, but inside she was suffocating. She turned to glance at William. He was still asleep, unaware that today would be the last day of his life. She picked up her phone and checked for a response to last night's message. Nothing. That was good. That meant the plan was still intact. A sudden movement behind her made Olivia tense. William stirred, stretching his arms before slowly opening his eyes. He smiled when he saw her. "Good morning, my love," he said, his voice hoarse from sleep. Olivia forced a smile. "Good morning, darling." She leaned in and kissed his forehead, resisting the urge to recoil. The thought of touching him made her skin crawl, but she had perfected the act over time. "I'll get breakfast ready," she said, slipping out of bed. William chuckled. "You? Cooking? That's a surprise." She laughed softly, walking toward the kitchen. Once out of sight, her smile vanished. The real surprise was coming. Olivia stood in the spacious kitchen, preparing a tray of breakfast. She arranged everything carefully. A glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, scrambled eggs, toast with butter. But the most important ingredient was the small vial of white powder she poured into the juice. Arsenic. Tasteless. Undetectable in small amounts. Slow but effective. She stirred the juice, watching the powder dissolve completely. Her fingers trembled slightly. She wasn't afraid of what she was doing. She had been waiting for this moment for years. A knock on the front door startled her. Her heart pounded as she quickly wiped her hands and walked to the door. When she opened it, she was met with the last person she expected to see, Detective James Calloway. Dressed in a dark suit with a badge clipped to his belt, he stood there with a polite but firm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrington. Sorry to bother you so early," he said. "Is Mr. Harrington awake?" Olivia kept her expression calm, but her mind raced. Why was he here? Did he suspect something already? "He's just waking up," she replied smoothly. "Is something wrong?" James shook his head. "Not at all. I just have a few questions regarding a personal matter." Olivia hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." James Calloway walked into the penthouse, scanning the space with the sharp eyes of a seasoned investigator. Everything looked perfect, untouched. Too perfect. William was sitting up in bed when James entered the room. "James, what a surprise," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mr. Harrington," James greeted. "I won't take much of your time. I just need to ask you about a case I'm working on." Olivia's hands clenched into fists. She had planned for every detail, except for an uninvited guest. James took a seat in the chair across from the bed. Olivia remained standing, her body tense. "Do you know a man named Daniel Cole?" James asked. William frowned. "Daniel Cole? That name sounds familiar." James nodded. "He was your former business partner. Disappeared 3 years ago." William scoffed. "Oh, that Daniel. Yes, we had a falling out. I heard he ran off after a bad deal." James studied him. "His wife doesn't believe that. She hired me to look into it." Olivia's breath hitched. This was not part of the plan. William sighed. "That man was a crook, James. I cut ties with him for a reason." James nodded, then turned to Olivia. "Mrs. Harrington, did you know Daniel?" She smiled politely. "Not at all. I wasn't in William's life back then." James held her gaze for a moment, something flickering in his sharp blue eyes. Olivia met his stare, refusing to flinch. "Right," James said finally, standing up. "Thank you for your time." Olivia exhaled slowly as she followed him to the door. But just as she opened it, James turned back. "One last thing," he said, looking directly at her. "Congratulations on your wedding. I hope this is everything you wanted." His words lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Olivia smiled sweetly. "It is." James gave her one last look before leaving. Olivia shut the door and locked it. Turning back to the kitchen, she grabbed the tray and carried it to William. "Breakfast is ready, darling," she said softly, setting the tray on his lap. William picked up the orange juice first. Olivia watched as he lifted it to his lips. Olivia's hands turned cold as she watched William's reaction to the phone call. His face, usually calm and composed, had gone pale. He gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white. "What do you mean they found the body?" William barked into the phone. Olivia swallowed hard. Daniel Cole's body had been found? This wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to be in control of the narrative, but now something else was happening. Something she wasn't prepared for. "Who else knows?" William demanded. A pause, then his expression darkened even further. "I see. Keep me updated." He ended the call and slowly turned his head toward Olivia. She quickly composed herself, flashing a concerned look. "Is something wrong, darling?" William studied her for a moment before shaking his head. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Olivia knew that was a lie. Instead of pressing, she simply smiled and reached for the glass of poison orange juice. "Drink up. You look like you need it." William sighed and picked up the glass again. He brought it to his lips, but just before he took a sip, his phone rang again. Olivia clenched her fists. Damn it. This time, William ignored the call and set the glass down. "I need to handle something," he muttered, pulling the blanket off and stepping out of bed. "I have a meeting at my office." Olivia kept her expression calm, but inside panic crept in. If he left, she wouldn't get another chance today. "Are you sure? It's your first morning as a married man," she said, draping her arms around his neck. "Can it wait?" William looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I wish it could, my love, but I need to fix something before it gets out of hand." Olivia forced a smile and kissed him softly. "Okay, but at least have a little juice before you go." He smirked. "I'll drink it when I get back." Her heart sank. She had planned everything down to the last detail, but now the timing was ruined. William got dressed in his tailored navy blue suit and left the penthouse. The moment the door shut behind him, Olivia exhaled sharply and ran a hand through her hair. She picked up her phone and sent another message. Change of plans. I need another option. Seconds later, a reply came. We knew this might happen. Stay calm. She placed the phone down, trying to steady her breathing. Then just as she was about to clear away the untouched breakfast, a knock sounded at the door. Her heart skipped a beat. She walked cautiously and peeked through the peephole. Detective James Calloway, again. Taking a deep breath, Olivia unlocked the door and opened it. Detective, back so soon, she said, forcing a polite smile. James gave her a knowing look. Sorry to intrude again, Mrs. Harrington, but I have a few more questions. Olivia stepped aside. Of course. James walked in, his sharp eyes scanning the room again. He gestured to the untouched breakfast tray. William didn't eat? Olivia shrugged. Business called. James nodded. That man never takes a day off, does he? She chuckled. No, he doesn't. James studied her. You two had quite the wedding last night. Must be a whirlwind for you. Olivia tilted her head. Is there a reason for these questions, Detective? James smiled, but there was something unsettling about it. Just routine. She folded her arms. Routine for what? James leaned forward slightly. For a reopened murder case. One that William might have been involved in. Olivia's blood ran cold. She feigned confusion. Murder? That's ridiculous. James didn't blink. Is it? He pulled out his phone and showed her a picture. It was an old news article with a headline that read, Businessman Daniel Cole goes missing. Foul play suspected. Below it was a picture of Daniel, a tall man with dark hair and a strong jawline. Olivia's stomach twisted at the sight of him. James watched her reaction carefully. Does he look familiar? Olivia shook her head. Like I said, I didn't know him. James nodded slowly. Right. He slipped his phone back into his pocket. I have a theory, Mrs. Harrington. She raised an eyebrow. A theory? James smirked. That William didn't just cut ties with Daniel. He made sure Daniel disappeared for good. Olivia forced a laugh. You've been watching too many crime dramas, Detective. James chuckled, but his eyes remained sharp. Maybe. Or maybe I know when something isn't adding up. Silence filled the space between them. Then James took a step closer. Tell me something, Olivia. Why did you marry William? She blinked. What? Why him? A man 37 years older than you? His voice was calm, but his eyes were piercing. Love? Money? Or something else? Olivia kept her face neutral, but inside she was screaming. You're overstepping, Detective, she said coolly. I don't have to explain my marriage to you. James smiled again, stepping back. Of course not. He walked toward the door but paused before opening it. One last thing, he said, turning back. Where were you 3 years ago? Olivia sat frozen in the chair, staring at the breakfast tray that should have sealed William's fate. Her mind raced through everything that had just happened. Daniel's body had been found. James Calloway was asking the right questions, and now her secret was dangerously close to being exposed. She clenched her fists. 3 years ago, she had been a different woman, a woman in love, a woman with dreams. Daniel had been her future, her safe place. Then one night, he simply vanished. She knew William was responsible, but she had no proof. Until now. Her phone buzzed, a message. Unknown number. Meet me at 10:30, same spot. Her pulse spiked. She knew who it was. She grabbed her coat and left the penthouse without a second thought. The air was crisp as Olivia stepped out of the black SUV that had brought her to the quiet park on the Upper West Side. Bare trees lined the path, their branches swaying gently in the winter breeze. She walked toward a lone bench where a man in a dark hoodie sat, hands stuffed into his pockets. As she approached, he lifted his head slightly. Olivia, he muttered. Reggie, she whispered back. Reggie Lawson had been Daniel's closest friend, a man who had spent the last 3 years searching for answers, just like she had. You heard, Olivia said. Reggie nodded, his jaw clenched. They found him in a construction site downtown, buried under concrete. His eyes darkened. Just like we suspected, A lump formed in Olivia's throat. Daniel had been so close this entire time, and William had walked free, living his life as if nothing had happened. "Calloway's onto something," she said. "He came to the penthouse this morning, asking about Daniel." Reggie scoffed. "Good. Maybe that bastard will finally get what's coming." Olivia shook her head. "No, it's not enough. If they find out I was connected to Daniel, everything falls apart." Reggie frowned. "So what do we do?" Olivia took a deep breath. "We finish this. Tonight." Reggie's eyes narrowed. "You mean?" "Yes." Her voice was cold, steady. "The poison didn't work. I need a backup plan." Reggie hesitated, then nodded. "I have a guy. No questions asked. It'll be clean." Olivia exhaled in relief. "Good. Do it." Reggie studied her for a long moment. "Are you sure?" Olivia's gaze hardened. "William took everything from me. Now I take everything from him." Detective James Calloway sat in his car, flipping through old case files. The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but his gut told him Olivia Harrington wasn't just a gold digger. There was something deeper going on. He pulled up a database search and typed in Olivia Carter. 3 years ago. The results loaded. His eyes scanned the screen. Then he froze. 3 years ago, Olivia Carter was engaged to Daniel Cole. James let out a slow breath. "So that's the connection," he muttered. He picked up his phone and dialed his partner. "Murphy, I need you to pull phone records on Olivia Carter and William Harrington. Any unusual contacts, especially in the last 24 hours. Murphy grumbled on the other end. "You think she's up to something?" James stared at the screen, at the old engagement photos of Olivia and Daniel. "I think she's out for revenge." William Harrington sat in his office, swirling a glass of bourbon, deep in thought. Daniel Cole's body had been found. That was a problem, and now James Calloway was sniffing around. That was an even bigger problem. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. A deep voice answered. "I need something handled," William said quietly. "A woman." A pause. Then the voice on the other end chuckled. "Consider it done." William hung up. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. If Olivia was hiding something, she wouldn't live long enough to see it through. Olivia returned to the penthouse, her nerves on edge. William wasn't home yet. Good. She picked up her phone and checked the time. Reggie's guy was set to move at 10 p.m., but she had a bad feeling. Something wasn't right. Then her phone vibrated. A blocked number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" A deep, unfamiliar voice responded. "Mrs. Harrington, you should be more careful who you trust." Olivia's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. The voice chuckled. "William knows, and he's coming for you first." The line went dead. Olivia's breath came in short gasps. "He knows." She grabbed her bag and ran. There was only one person who could help her now. James Calloway. Olivia's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel of her black Mercedes, weaving through New York's congested streets. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a warning that she was one step away from disaster. William knew. The realization sent a cold chill down her spine. She had spent years planning his downfall, believing she was in control, but now the game had shifted. She was no longer the hunter. She was the prey. Her destination was clear. Detective James Calloway. She didn't trust cops, but right now James was the only one who could keep her alive. She reached for her phone and dialed his number. "Calloway," his deep voice answered. "It's Olivia," she said quickly, checking her rearview mirror for any signs of a tail. "I need to see you." Now there was a pause. "What's going on? I don't have time to explain," she hissed. "William knows everything. Someone just called and—" Tires screeched behind her. A black SUV was speeding up fast, weaving aggressively through traffic. Her blood turned to ice. "They found me," she whispered. "Where are you?" James asked sharply. Before she could answer, the SUV cut across lanes, aiming directly at her. Everything happened in seconds. The SUV rammed into her car from behind, sending her skidding toward oncoming traffic. Horns blared, drivers swerved, tires screamed against the asphalt. Olivia gripped the wheel, fighting for control. "Shit!" she gasped. The SUV moved to ram her again. Whoever was inside wasn't trying to scare her. They were trying to kill her. She made a split-second decision. If they wanted a chase, she'd give them one. She slammed her foot on the gas, darting through a red light. Pedestrians screamed as she narrowly avoided hitting a cyclist. The SUV followed, relentless. "Olivia, talk to me," James's voice shouted through the phone. "I'm being chased. Black SUV. 2 men inside," she panted. "Get off the main road. Take the alleys," James instructed. She veered hard to the right, her tires screeching as she sped into a narrow alley. Garbage cans toppled over, metal scraping against her car's side. But she was still moving. The SUV didn't slow down. They were going to force her off the road. Olivia's mind raced. Think, think, think. Then she spotted it, a crowded parking garage. She swerved into it at the last second. The SUV roared past, missing the turn. Olivia sped up the ramps, winding higher and higher. She needed to hide. At the 4th level, she spotted an empty space and killed the engine. Her chest heaved as she sat in silence, gripping the wheel. She waited. Seconds passed, then minutes. No sound, no footsteps. Had she lost them? Her phone buzzed. "James, where are you?" he asked urgently. "Parking garage on West 45th, she whispered. "Stay there. I'm coming." She ended the call, her hands still shaking. Then, just as she thought she was safe, a dark silhouette appeared in her rearview mirror. A man in a black leather jacket stood behind her car, his face obscured by shadows. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "Not yet. I can't die yet." She reached for her bag, feeling for the small knife she always carried. The man stepped closer, pulling something from his pocket. A gun. Olivia's stomach twisted. Her only chance was to act first. She pushed the car door open with all her strength, slamming it into the man's legs. He grunted in pain, stumbling backward. That was all she needed. She lunged at him, slashing wildly with the knife. He dodged, but the blade caught his arm, tearing through fabric and flesh. Blood splattered onto the pavement. The man cursed and raised the gun. A gunshot rang out, but it wasn't his. The man's body jerked, a red bloom appearing on his chest. He dropped the gun and collapsed. Behind him, James Calloway stood with his gun raised, his face stone cold. "Jesus Christ, Olivia," he muttered, lowering his weapon. Olivia gasped for air, her heart slamming against her ribs. She looked down at the man's lifeless body, her hands still clutching the bloody knife. She had almost died. James stepped forward. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still in shock. James exhaled, then turned the body over with his boot. The man's face was rough, lined with scars. "Professional hitman," James muttered. "William sent him." A wave of nausea hit Olivia. William had wanted her dead before she could expose him. James turned to her. "We need to end this." Now Olivia swallowed hard, gripping his arm. "Then let's finish it tonight." James nodded. "Tell me everything." She took a deep breath. 3 years ago, William murdered my fiancé, Daniel Cole, and I married him to make him pay. James stared at her, then slowly nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's bring the bastard down." The dim lights of James Calloway's office cast long shadows as Olivia sat across from him, her fingers gripping the armrests of her chair. Her breathing had steadied, but the adrenaline was still there, pulsing beneath her skin. James leaned forward, his elbows resting on his desk. "Tell me everything, and don't leave anything out." Olivia swallowed hard. 3 years ago, I was engaged to Daniel Cole. He was my entire world. We had plans, marriage, a life together. Her voice wavered, but she forced herself to keep going. Then one night, he disappeared. No warnings, no goodbyes, just gone. James nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you think William had him killed?" "I don't think. I know," Olivia said bitterly. "Daniel worked for him. He was part of William's investment firm, one of his most trusted analysts. But Daniel found something he wasn't supposed to. Fraud, money laundering, maybe worse. He told me he was going to the authorities." James sighed. "And he never got the chance." Olivia clenched her fists. "I confronted William after Daniel disappeared. He denied everything, but I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't even sorry." Her gaze darkened. "So I did the only thing I could. I got close. I became the woman he wanted. I let him believe I loved him, and when he finally proposed, I said yes." James exhaled. "You married him to kill him?" "Yes." James was silent for a long moment. Then he stood up, pacing. "You do realize if we take him down legally, you won't get to finish your plan?" Olivia met his eyes. "I don't care how it happens. I just want him to suffer." James smirked. "Good, because I have an idea." William Harrington poured himself a glass of whiskey, his mind still processing the day's events. Daniel's body had been found. The detective was asking too many questions, and Olivia had run off without an explanation. Something wasn't right. He glanced at the burner phone on his desk. His hired man should have reported back by now. But there had been nothing. A cold sensation settled in his stomach. Then his phone rang, a private number. He answered. "Who is this?" A deep chuckle came from the other end. "You already know, William." William stiffened. "James Calloway. Smart man," James said. "I figured I'd call personally. Saves us both time. What do you want?" "A meeting." William swirled his whiskey, keeping his voice calm. "I don't do meetings with cops." James laughed. "You will this time, because if you don't, I'll make sure the entire NYPD comes knocking at your door with a search warrant." Silence. Then William sighed. "Where?" "Your penthouse. 1 hour." William smirked. "You must have a death wish, detective." James's voice was casual. "Just come alone, William. You'll want to hear what I have to say." Click. William set the phone down and took a slow sip of his drink. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out his gun. If this was a trap, he'd be ready. Olivia sat on the couch, her heart hammering as she waited. The penthouse was dimly lit, the atmosphere thick with tension. James sat across from her, loading his gun. "He'll come armed," James said. "I'm counting on it," Olivia replied coldly. A knock came at the door. James nodded. "Showtime." Olivia walked to the door, smoothing out her dress. She took a deep breath, then opened it. William stood there, his face unreadable. He stepped inside slowly, eyes flicking between her and James. "Well, well," he said, his voice smooth. "The loving wife and the detective. What a pair." James leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Cut the act, William. We both know why you're here." William chuckled. "Do we?" James pulled out a folder and tossed it onto the table. "That's everything we have on you. Fraud, money laundering, murder, enough to put you away forever." William didn't even look at it. "You think you can prove any of that?" James smirked. "I don't need to. The feds will be very interested in Daniel Cole's body." William's jaw clenched. "You don't have shit." James shrugged. "Maybe. But your wife? She does." William slowly turned to Olivia. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I know what you did," she said softly. "To Daniel." William's lips curled into a smirk. "And," Olivia's breath hitched, but she steadied herself. "And I wanted you to suffer." William took a step closer. "And what's your plan, darling? Turn me in." She smirked. "Number, I want you to watch your empire crumble. And then, I'll make sure you die alone, just like Daniel did." William laughed darkly. "You really think you're in control?" He pulled out his gun and aimed it at James. James didn't even flinch. "Go ahead," he said. "Shoot me. See how fast the feds tear you apart." William hesitated. That was all Olivia needed. She reached for the knife hidden in her dress and drove it straight into William's side. His eyes widened in shock as he stumbled backward. Blood seeped through his expensive suit. "You!" he gasped. Olivia twisted the knife deeper. "This is for Daniel." The penthouse was a crime scene. Blood pooled on the expensive marble floors, staining the elegance William Harrington had spent a lifetime building. James Calloway stood with his hands on his hips, watching as forensic teams moved through the room. The official report was simple: self-defense. William had drawn his gun on Olivia. James had no choice but to fire. That was the story, and no one would question it. Olivia sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her hands steady despite everything. She had waited 3 years for this night, and now it was over. A uniformed officer approached James. "We're wrapping up here, detective. The DA's office will review the case, but from the looks of it, it's cut and dry. James nodded. Good. Make sure the press gets the right story. The officer hesitated. And the widow? He nodded toward Olivia. She's free to go? James glanced at her, then back at the officer. She's been through enough. The officer nodded and walked away. James turned to Olivia. You should leave before the reporters start swarming. She smirked. Worried about me? James chuckled. You just killed your husband. Maybe a little. Olivia stood, tossing the blanket aside. William was dead the moment I said I do. Tonight was just a formality. James shook his head, grinning. You're something else, Olivia. She stepped closer, looking him dead in the eyes. And you're a good man, James. But good men don't last in this world. James watched as she walked toward the elevator, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Just before the doors closed, she turned to him. Take care, detective. And then she was gone. Olivia walked through the quiet streets of New York, inhaling the crisp night air. She had spent years suffocating under William's control, living a life that wasn't her own. Now, she was free. Her phone buzzed. A message from Reggie. It's done. The money is yours. She smirked. William's offshore accounts were now in her name. The millions he had hoarded, they were hers. She didn't just take his life. She took everything. She turned a corner and stepped into a sleek black car. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. She looked out the window at the city that had swallowed her whole and spit her back out. Somewhere new, she said. Somewhere far away. The car pulled into traffic. As Olivia disappeared into the night, she allowed herself one final thought. Revenge was sweet, but freedom? That was priceless. James Calloway stood in his office, staring at a newspaper headline. Widow walks free after tragic shooting of billionaire husband. He smirked. Olivia had vanished without a trace. No credit card activity, no new addresses, just gone. He wasn't surprised. She was too smart to stick around. Murphy, his partner, walked in. You still thinking about her? James chuckled. She's unforgettable. Murphy shook his head. You let a killer walk, Calloway. James shrugged. I let justice happen. Murphy sighed. You ever think she played you? James smirked. Oh, she definitely did. He folded the newspaper and tossed it into the trash, and for some reason, he didn't mind one bit.